Welcome to episode 2 of Projects in Focus, where we'll be diving into the planning stage of the project lifecycle, specifically looking at the Perth Arena case study and asking the question of whether to plan or not to plan should even be a question. If you like our approach to passing on lessons learned to project managers across our industry, please like, subscribe, and tell a friend, as this will help promote our profession to level up, bringing in new guests and even better case studies to you. Today, I'm really excited for 2 reasons. One, Perth Arena is my favorite venue to visit in the CBD. Diving into this project as professional aspects have been very intriguing. And secondly, our guest is Dr. Richard Hughes, a professor from Edith Cowan University in Western Australia. Richard has more than 20 years experience leading big and complex government projects. And these days, he's teaching and researching project management at ECU. His current work explores how we can manage large programs more strategically, how to build sustainability into those projects, and how to tackle the difficult ethical questions, from the use of AI to addressing modern slavery in project supply chains. I first met Richard in 2016, and we instantly hit it off due to our shared passion for enhancing the project management career pathway and creating opportunities for students and across project management. We have had many discussions around sustainability and more recently about how to level up the project management profession. I'm delighted to welcome him to the show today to talk about the importance of planning and Perth Arena. Richard, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Reece. It's a great pleasure to be here this morning.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've been really excited for today. And, working with you in the past has been fantastic. So I expect the same thing's going to be an interesting conversation today.
I can't believe it's been nearly 10 years.
Well, yes, it's almost the good old 10, but we've had some really interesting times over that.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit, while I've only known you at ECU, tell us a bit about, that 20 years of project experience that you've got there.
Yeah, mainly probably tell by my accent, from the northwest of England, working on government projects, central government and local government, and then pivoted to some commercial projects, came over to Australia and did the same sort of thing. And ended up at ECU and got my PhD, and here I am.
Still going in, doing all the fun things with the new ones coming through, essentially.
Yeah, I really enjoy the teaching stuff, but I also enjoy the research stuff, because the research stuff powers a lot of the changes that are happening in the guides and the standards. If we take PMI, for example, but also from APM's perspective, and also from the International Project Management Association. And I know you're involved with the Australian branch. And obviously, it's important that whatever the academics propose is not bonkers. It's really important that it supports what we're all trying to achieve, because we're all trying to come at this from the same angle. And we sometimes disagree. There's a lot of disagreements at the moment about sustainability, and I might touch on that if I get a chance. But also things like modern slavery that you mentioned. It's just really important that we look at how we can get rid of it, but we also need to understand why it's there.
Absolutely.
Why we're in that position. But yeah, I mean, that kind of pivots to things like big infrastructure projects, and we saw tons and tons of those after the pandemic. And that was government's way right across the globe of trying to revitalize the economies, trying to get things back on track. And the challenge with that is when you're doing an awful lot in a fairly short time, by trying to throw money at the problem doesn't mean to say that the infrastructure you are creating is good, useful, or sustainable. So there was a similar kind of mindset, I think, going back to 2000, kind of early 2000s, mid 2000s. And certainly as Perth was trying to expand, there were plans like, how do we do something with the city because it's constrained? So, sink the railway line. That gives you access to Northbridge. What else can you stick there? How can we get noticed on the world stage? Hotman Cop. Yeah. That was the plans. And that's kind of the context. So it's not the same as the pandemic, but there was an awful lot going on. And I've got loads of sympathy for the project managers who were involved with many of these projects. And we're only really talking about Perth Arena, RAC Arena, as it's known at the moment, because it's a really good case study.
It is fantastic. And, you talk about all of those things that happened. And one of the key elements is, what we're here to talk about today, the planning stage of that life cycle. When you have that political pressure to fast track, it's usually one of the first things that people look at to cut in terms of just resources, energy, and time. Not even talking about the dollar figures for it. But yeah, what is your experience from, when you're in that delivery / planning stage of your career? What are some of the key highlights of a planning? So what's something that you've seen done well in your career in the planning stage?
I had a mentor when I was in the UK, a really experienced project and program manager, and he kept trying to emphasize benefits and trying to get benefits raised with the project steering group and the program steering groups, because he said that's what the project was all about. And he kept going on about it. And I think a lot of the senior people didn't quite understand what he was saying. I do. And I did at the time. And it was just disappointing that his point of view wasn't always adopted. And it was more about create the thing that we're trying to create. And then the culture of it'll all be okay in the end. And that's not necessarily true. You might have something, you might create something, but you may have made mistakes along the line. But since the project team vanishes, once the thing that you are making has been made, has been completed, who's going to look back and say, what mistakes did we make? Can we improve on it? Did we actually get what we paid for? Because you'd do that. If you bought a car, you'd do that. You'd have a look at that, drive it around. Same with a house. Excellent. So why don't we do it with assets? And I think the interesting aspect to my career has been that I predominantly worked in the government sector. So public projects rather than commercial projects. I've been involved with commercial projects as well. And I think it's important to give some context. And that is one of the reasons why I think a lot of government projects struggle. And when we look at Perth Arena, that's one of the reasons it struggled. And that's because a lot of people who are involved in making the decisions almost want to be congratulated for securing the funding right at the start. So it's let's build an arena. And then the natural question from their colleagues, elected representatives, the press, is how much and by when?
Very two important questions. But I want to go back a second to what you were saying before about, the highlight of that planning phase. Now, you said the benefits, and referring back to the benefits. Now, that is a fantastic example of what to do right in that planning phase, is to have the ability to reference, to identify and continuously hammer home that message of why are we planning to achieve these benefits? What are we trying to deliver to achieve these benefits? You can work backwards from there and, what are the actions that achieve those benefits? What is the infrastructure required to achieve those benefits? In an IT world, what are the software elements that need to be installed into an overall user interface to achieve those benefits? And bringing it back to that point, or being able to reference, is not always an easy thing for a project manager. One, because, I'd probably say as bad as 6 out of 10, depending on which project you walk into and where, you may not be able to reference, let alone understand what those benefits are, because they happened way back in that initiation phase. And there's usually sometimes there could be, 5 years, or it's been put on the shelf for longer. So it's been a project that they wanted to do a decade ago. It was thought of in an initiation stage and has been brought into the planning stage. And then it's like, oh, what are the benefits of this? What are we trying to achieve? And sometimes you need to look at them again. Can you give us a bit of an overview of what Perth Arena is now? So that, the people listening who aren't necessarily familiar with Perth, give us an example, give us a rundown of what the project delivered and what it is to us in Perth today.
Yeah, it's one of the top 10 entertainment venues. And it's a centrally placed space that is capable of hosting sporting events, concerts, ice skating, just multi-use, retractable seating. It's got the space, it's got the infrastructure to support it, and it's just acoustically, it's good. I've been there. I think the first time I went there was to see the Top Gear lot.
Yep.
Just after they got sacked by the Bees.
I was there on that one too.
And just being there, because I'd seen the building from the outside. It's a very unusual shaped building. But if you look at it carefully, there's things like stars, hidden stars in it. And the whole point of the angles, and as a slight digression, I was talking to an architect and I said, what do you think of Perth Arena? She said, what do you think of Perth Arena? And she hadn't designed it, but she was involved with designing the new museum. And I said, it's a bit of a dramatic building. Good, she said. That's the whole point. No, that is it. So the point of the building is to get you to say, what's that building?
Yeah.
And either say, I like it, I don't like it. It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Did it draw your attention?
Absolutely.
Did it get you to look at did it say what's in there?
Yeah.
What's going on there? Did it make you ask those questions? And that's half the battle sometimes.
But when you look inside, it's beautifully finished. It's a really nice building. And a lot of public buildings have to be, because it's quite difficult to get money to upgrade these things. So they've got to be built to last. And of course, if you've got hundreds of thousands of people, you have to have something that
was resilient.
Absolutely.
Take a pounding.
Yeah. So it's a really good building. It's really popular. It's the venue of choice for a lot of people coming to Perth. It does things that Optus Stadium can't do. But it also is really flexible. So it's one of the top 10 entertainment venues. And that, if you were to imagine the business case, and a benefit in that business case would be to make it really successful. And it is. What wasn't as good as it could have been was the way that the project was planned.
Absolutely. And that's what we're here to talk about.
Absolutely, yeah.
So give us a bit of context of how you use this case study for students. I've used this case study in talking to other people, but how do you use it to kind of bring awareness for students in the planning stage? How do you use it?
Yeah, it's quite easy to start off at the end. So I usually start off by writing on the board 400 million, 3 years, and then say Perth Arena was 400 million over the original budget, and it was 3 years later. Tell me about that. Does that mean it's a good project? But of course, most students shake their heads and say, no, that was terrible, really bad. I'll never do anything like that. So then we start to unpack it and we start to look at what went wrong. And I think it's important to understand the perspective of the person that is trying to imagine themselves as a project manager, because there are two types of project manager for most projects. One project manager works for the organization that funds the project. So they sit on with the funding organization. So their job is essentially to take the business case and sometimes to prepare the business case, which has strategic benefits in it, So if we do this thing as intended, we will achieve these benefits, and that advances where the organization is going to be. It's as simple as that. But those people stop when it comes to actually doing the construction, because there are insufficient people with the necessary skills to complete the scope of the project with something like the Perth Arena. So I mentioned ECU City. I have not had to use a wheelbarrow full of cement to try and do something on that site, even though I'm employed by the university. And that's because we don't have the skills, and it would be a complete mess if we did. So the contractor is brought in. Now, in terms, I mentioned Offers Weichel before, in terms of Offers Weichel's work, the contractor is called a performing organisation, which also has project managers working for it. So the project managers there are really just concerned with completing the scope of the project. But to complete the scope of the project, you have to know what the scope of the project is. And that was one of the big issues with Perth Arena. When you look at there's some Auditor General reports, and there's a report from the Committee for Perth, what they thought would kill us, I think is the title. Fascinating reads when you put those together, because they tell you some of the things that didn't go as planned. They also tell you some of the things that were quite good. And like I said, the starting point is this is a really successful building. But how did we get to the position where the budget was breached and so were the timelines? How did we get there?
Yeah, and we're going to unpack that in a second. My last question in that space of the students, what is their biggest aha moment when they're going through this project? What do you think is the biggest aha?
Yeah, there's always two moments. The first is that a lot of project managers don't see the distinction between what you do on the funding organisation side as a project manager, which essentially is to make sure that the scope is right for the thing that you are going to go out with a legal contract to get someone else to do that work, because that legal contract has repercussions if it's incomplete. Yep. So that's essentially what project managers for the funding organisation need to do. And then they essentially twiddle their thumbs while the thing is being constructed by an organisation that's brought in to perform the project. So that's a contractor. But in the contracting side, there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done to work out exactly how long this thing will take, and exactly what needs to be done, and exactly how much it will cost, and who will do it. And that's probably like a joint endeavour between the funding organisation and the performing organisation. But the specialists in terms of scheduling will sit with the contractor. So if students are predominantly aware of what contractors do, they won't see the business case. They won't understand all that, and they don't need to. It's nothing to do with their organisation. But if you're on the other side, working for the government, you need to understand all these things, and you still need to understand time, cost, and scope, and to work out in your planning for your procurement what you can realistically do with the budget that you've got. If you've got a mismatch, then there's a problem. But let's just get to the fact that a contract has been signed. Project managers from both sides have to work together.
And I love metaphors. So, I'm going to use table tennis as a bit of a metaphor here. I call the planning stage pull the table tennis up. So you've got, the wall on the other end, and you just practice, and you're working through all the different shots to try and get your skill level and understanding of the project to a certain level. And that's what I'm hearing from you. And then when you get to that delivery side, you push down the other end, your contractor who's been doing the exact same thing, but from their perspective. And then it turns into I've done this. Oh, you need to do this. And I've done that. And you're playing table tennis for a couple of years from the office chair over emails, essentially, and phone calls and meetings, etc. So, like the metaphor there and it's really important from my perspective of people to understand that there's no right or wrong aspect to this. There is perspective of the delivering project professional, organization, sorry, and the sponsoring organization. And they need to work together, but at the same time understand one has a goal of working within a box and one's trying to deliver the best box possible, and then, there's very different constraints on both of them. So I really like those two aha moments. Like that's how you can really, bring it into students' perspective of where people really take this case study and can bring it out to the professional organization when they leave. So in terms of the planning stage of Perth Arena, where do you find where do you find the hardest bit to teach a student? So what is the hardest thing or hardest concept from this case study to actually to bring forward and make sure people understand?
This is going to sound really stupid, but one of the most difficult things about Perth Arena as a case study is to try and explain to students the importance of the work breakdown structure. It's absolutely pivotal. And until you understand what it is you're trying to create, which is the ultimate deliverable, Perth Arena, and decompose that to sub-deliverables down to the lowest possible sub-deliverable, and not to confuse that with work that is going to be done, which is work packages, then you realize that you're talking about a work breakdown structure and not a schedule, because then the schedule is different. The schedule is the thing that has a lot of the detail in, and when you get your schedule right, you can then baseline it. And that is the point from which you can then measure whether you are following your plan. So you have to have a work breakdown structure somewhere, and you have to have a schedule, and you have to have a baseline schedule. And the baseline one is the one that you can redo. So if there is an issue and you take a big change back to the board and say, I need to, do you approve this change? Mm-hmm. Board will say, yes, we approve it. But you as a project manager should have re-baselined it as a draft and said, and these are the implications of making this change. And this is one of the issues we find with projects, and you can see it on Perth Arena where the scope changed. So once scope changes, how is that going to impact your schedule? And the only way to know that is to go back to your work breakdown structure. And this stuff has been going around since we sent people to the moon. It's just that it tends to get forgotten. But you have to, as a project manager, if you're working on waterfall projects, you have to understand what a work breakdown structure is and what a schedule is.
I wouldn't even say limiting it to waterfall projects. Agile absolutely needs a work breakdown structure, even though that they're not sequentially connected in the schedule context. But every framework, in my view, needs a lot more focus on the work breakdown structure, and I would say it's not limited to your classroom either. Like when I'm out there and doing and throwing in the environment of project management, work breakdown structure, bringing it back and making sure that it's consistent. Because then, if you have a good work breakdown structure, that leads into a good schedule. That leads into a good cost management. And then that leads into good scope management. Because then you have, hey, you want this new scope, or here's the new 100 work breakdown schedule lines, and this is the implication. So you can identify what was in the scope and outside of the scope.
And where do your risks come from? Where do most of your risks, you find them in the work breakdown structure and in your schedule?
And that's my favorite topic, like risk management, work breakdown structure. One of the things that I promote as much as possible in risk management is linking the risk event to the work breakdown structure, so that you know which element, which contract package, which specific area is at risk of an impact of either a positive or a negative, because risk can be either, of occurring during the planning or the delivery phase. And the work breakdown structure is essentially the first point for all of those activities of project management. But also at the same time, not surprised it's the hardest concept to get across to students that have never seen or haven't experienced the work breakdown structure, because they don't have that value. Like if I get this right first, everything else is so much easier. And they don't have that value. They haven't struggled through a schedule without a work breakdown structure. They haven't struggled through a cost breakdown without a WBS to break it down for them. Like all of those elements, the struggle is what creates the value. And sometimes because, hey, this is, you're the person that's been doing it for 20 years before you said it, sometimes not enough to motivate people to undertake a good work breakdown structure. But I have seen some really good ones, most recently as well. But I've seen some really good ones out there in the workplace, and you can see those projects either, they use that very strong work breakdown structure to get all of those other elements to work as they need to, and then it becomes a lot more resilient to those unforeseen impacts of GFCs and pandemics and political changes to the environment. It becomes a bit more resilient, quicker to manage, easier to understand where the impacts are as well. And, like that, there's an interesting example in the Perth Arena, and I don't know if you know, one of the key examples of this occurring was the parking for Perth Arena. Are you familiar with this situation?
Yeah, they decided to move parking underground. And one of the issues is that when you look at the Auditor General report that was presented as saving money. I don't know how digging out more things would save you more money when you got to re-scope everything so that it stands correctly and doesn't collapse in on the car park. And that was obviously just found to be inaccurate when they looked at the figures. There is another aspect that was changed as well, and that was the government decided to originally go for a design and construct contract. So that would push a lot of the risk onto the developer, the contractor, and then decided to switch just to a construct only, which begs the question, what are we building and what did the contract say originally? And I haven't seen the contract, but it does seem a very dramatic change to move from something so fundamental as from the contractor side, we do everything, to, well, we just build it.
And like, there's two interesting points there. Let's go back to that first one. The car park, the original concept had a multi-story car park over the rail line, essentially building up over the rail. And then the decision was, to save time and money, like you said, instead of having to adhere to all of the rail requirements of building above it and all of the things that, because it is a legislative high risk environment when you're building over a rail line, they moved it underground. But then the key thing that kind of hurts anything going underground in Perth, West Australia, is the high water table. We have a very high water table. Perth is on a river that's a reclaimed mostly. So when you think about, where that water is, it is right there ready to go. So, when you're constructing in a waterlogged / you need to go a long way down to get to bedrock, just to substantiate your building. There's a lot of difficulties and doing that in a water environment.
And there's no way that would save was it 54 million or something?
No, that was the cost, the extra cost that it put to the project. So it ended up costing an extra 54 million and took them an extra 12 months to deliver.
Yeah, but there was in part, I think it was in the Auditor General's report, there was mention of this would save money.
There was originally in the decision matrix, or however they came to the decision, and when they're comparing going over the rail or under the Perth Arena, that was part of a recommendation, was that this would save money and reduce the overall cost. And again, we can get into that a bit further into that second part, but that's at which stage do you make that decision is also important. And that kind of alludes to the second example, where originally it was a design and construct. So what that normally means for those that aren't aware is that you get a concept concept design, everyone's happy with the concept, and then you tender it out from concept, essentially saying, we're happy with this concept, but we're not going to give you exactly everything we want. These are the requirements. These are the benefits. This is the general shape-ish of what we want, based on an architect engagement. Goes to tender, people tender, respond, and they'll do the design to try and achieve what you want and deliver it. And therefore, the idea of that methodology is to essentially improve the connection between what we design and what we need to construct. And then with the same contractor, they're meant to, be the most efficient at generating the connections between the two. A design and then construct, or a HC model, is kind of flips that on its head, and it says we will design exactly what we want, to the point of the nth detail, and then we'll publish that out or tender it out to the environment, where they will then respond and say, well, this is what you want, this is how we would build it, with no changes to design usually, or minimal changes, and then we go from that context. Now, there are two very different approaches to delivering a project. And what do when we look at those two different approaches, what is your, where do you see design and construct working really well, and where do you see or design then construct is two different? Where do you see the benefit, like the best case for a design and construct contract working, and where do you see a HC construct only contract working?
Design and construct would work well if you have full confidence in the contractor and the professionals working with the contractor in order to do what you are hoping to get to achieve through the concept. And theoretically, if it's something they are familiar with, it might take less time. And it also pushes more risk onto the contractor. If you then say, well, no, we're going to do the whole design, in terms of the projects, we alluded at the start to time, cost, and scope. That's actually another significant piece of work. It's a major, major piece of work. And it means you can't start building until you've got the detailed design. So that is going to change the timescales. And I would say that is where an awful lot of the problems for Perth Arena came from, because of the switch. If it had been one or the other and that was maintained, it might be a different story. But now you're starting to see, if we've written on the board 3 years late, 400 million over the original budget, you're starting to see where some of that time went and where a lot of that money went. And looking with the perspective of hindsight, you can say it was worth it. We've got a really good building, a really successful building.
Well, absolutely. Hindsight is definitely 2020. Hence the name of the channel being Projects in Focus. But in terms of where I see some significant benefits for design and construct versus HC is, as a sponsor or agency, do you know what you want? Do you know, is it something that's been built 100 times? So, I'll use bus depots as an example. Do we know exactly what we want? Yes. Agencies will then go and say, okay, this is what we want. This is how we want it. Design and construct, go. These are the requirements. Just design, construct, go. The flip side is, if you don't know what you want and it's a bespoke project, or there's legal requirements, legislative requirements that the agency needs to maintain and authority over, and that's where the design element potentially is more appropriate to be done separate to the construct. And then the construct comes in and goes, are you sure this is what you want? You go, absolutely, 100%. We've got the full detailed design. We've got the full legislative approvals all ticked off. Bespoke project, here we go. Yes, it does take longer for the design then construct, contract and procurement activities. but it shapes it. And choosing the right one for your project is happening in the planning phase. It does not happen in the initiation stage. It happens in the planning stage. And the choice of procurement has long-lasting effects well truly beyond the project. It can even sometimes cause a project just to completely be abandoned midway through. There are a few of those across, the case studies available. So in terms of where I see I'd love to dive into a little bit more is when do you think that procurement decision needs to happen in planning it? What information do you need to make a procurement decision?
I would argue that your procurement decision should be part of your business case.
Yeah.
For the simple reason that it's going to impact so many things. And if you're asking senior executives to make a decision on the business case, they need to know what procurement route you are going to go down, because there are legal consequences if it's done badly. And it really needs to align with the business case, because if you do the design and build, you're probably giving far more control to an organization that isn't your organization. And that impacts potentially on the benefits. And like we said at the start, benefits link to whatever it is from the strategic side, the organization that's funding it is all about. They're trying to push things forward, certainly from a commercial side as well. So not necessarily in the government space. I would argue that you need to be transparent up front, because if you don't, where are your senior stakeholders? They're going to lose confidence in the project managers, and it's easy to blame projects and project managers when the decisions that are made were not the right decisions at the start, and in some respects outside the control of the project manager.
And I'd add to that, there's the only other time, you should be considering options is where funding may not necessarily be available for delivery. So there's an explorative project going on. You've gone past, this is the right project, we should be doing it, but here's funding for design only. The design and construct contract, we shouldn't be tendering our D&C contract if we don't have full funding for projects, because it's usually putting the tender mechanism before the funding mechanism and the benefits realization thing. So there are caveats to when it is appropriate. The project may be appropriate for a design and construct, but you may have situations that you need to manage into making that decision. And, like any good business case, you have options. All right. Very rarely do you see procurement options in business cases for boards to choose from. But that's something else that could potentially be pushed through, is to say, hey, we prefer this delivery mechanism and we've considered this, and this, and that's why we've chosen this particular mechanism. Explaining it does take a little bit more time, and it does take a bit more engagement. But I feel that is key progress towards a good outcome. So, Richard, we've been talking about Perth Arena a lot. One of the things I want to dive into was the obvious thing that we've been talking about, which is, how did the dollar figure change so much? Well, when you're talking about this with your students, which we've already kind of engaged a little bit about, what do you tell the students? Why did the dollar change so much?
Well, there's a table, I think, in the Auditor General report. I don't know if you can bring it up on screen.
Yes,
yeah. And this one really shows where the money went, because the money just didn't vanish. It can be accounted for. And you can see on the table the significant sums that were spent on the management, procurement, design, construction, groundworks. We can also see the fact the car park wasn't included, which we've talked about, and the impact that has on the final budget. But you can also see that as you progress through the years, you spend more money. And we did mention that right at the start. If it had been an off-the-shelf thing with a design ready to go, it wouldn't have taken that long. And one of the things that you see with Perth Arena, which they weren't all captured in the Auditor General report, were the legal disputes, which naturally slow things down because that's what they do.
And not only that, there's a huge time difference between pre-tender and post-contract. So there's definitely some elements there that obviously are high-level summarized in the Auditor General, but you can see there was some serious conversations that went on in the background in those particular times. Another thing that has been interesting, an observation of late, is the AACE classification for projects has also been implemented around this time. And what you can see from the initial program is that this hasn't been applied. Where if you go and do this same project now at that concept level, so there's the figure that you see for 2005, there's just a single sum. What you would see is you would see your sum, your classification risk, your inherent, which is usually calls the inherent risk, and then you'll have your contingent risk provision and elements on top of that. So that's a huge change in 20 years to go from 2 sums to now you're going to have at least 7 at that same level of a concept. So have you ever explored that with the students and kind of said, okay, well, there's actually project management has come a long way in 20 years. Does that come part of the conversation?
Yeah, we have detailed conversations with students about costs and how to work out costs. And some of those dip into almost accounting approaches. And it's debatable about what project managers and certainly what students need to know when they graduate, but giving them awareness of the fact that it's more than just what comes out of the schedule. And the costs that the direct costs that you can see from the project. And I look at that table from the Auditor General, and the building is half the size of ECU City. I think the footprint, I'm kind of going off the footprint, which is the wrong way to look at it. I know the footprint of Perth Arena is around 35,000 square meters. And the usable, this is where it's wrong to look at it, probably a smaller footprint for ECU City, but much more intensive use of space because obviously it's a different building. But my question when I look at that table is, so what? And we said we were going to look at this with the benefit of hindsight. So what? And the reason I say so what is not just because Perth Arena is up and it's successful, but look, what has that building brought into Perth and the surrounding areas just because it's there for all the events that it runs. And this is where you come into value. And this is why one of the things we do show students is you can look at a spreadsheet like you can see from the Auditor General and you can see some of the problems. And from a project management perspective, that's absolutely right to do that. But we now have the benefit of hindsight. Does it matter? And I would say that it's a really successful building.
Absolutely. And so the so what, in my view, is how do we take this so it's less painful for the next Perth Arena project here in WA? They're talking about other projects that can be delivered to bring in those potential value benefits. We've just finished Metronet here. The so what discussion is, okay, now we've got the infrastructure, it attracts more people and brings more people into the city, etc., etc. So there are values, but is it going to be realized immediately? Highly unlikely. Are you going to get a repayment of all the money that you've spent or the government spent within 2 to 5 years? Probably not. These are the value parts of that discussion. But the so what, in my view, is the professional being able to sit there And I had this, I even said the same thing is how do we demonstrate value as a profession and be less wrong? Like whether we build, so we can bring a project before our plan, cheaper than whatnot, but we're still wrong. We can deliver a project post, we're still wrong, and exceed the budget and whatnot. It's just how do we be less wrong in this subjective art form that we take? It's not a straight black and white science, and that's the so what. For me, and I hope that can go back into the profession, because it's not an easy profession. You are ridiculed because you're always wrong. Uh, you're never right. And like it is that discussion piece. An engineer is always right until they're wrong. But a project manager is always wrong until the project's finished and then they're delivered. And then they're right. So that there's some interesting context and so what from my perspective. Another one is understanding the environments of the project, which you've already kind of alluded to. Like Perth needed an attractive piece to the city. They used that as this mechanism to attract people back to the city. Why were they trying to attract people back to the city at that time? There was a mining boom going on. People were going away, earning big dollars, working, and then they were just coming home and they weren't coming into the city. They were just, staying put and doing whatever they wanted at home. But people, we needed to get back in and created the environment. Didn't help with the delivery cost when the GFC came through at 2008, because you can even still see there was, from 2007 to 2008, there's still a big increase. And that was purely because we went from a year of unprecedented growth in 2007 to a global, oh no, what's happening? You've never seen this before in 2008. And it's a bit of a contrast of what we're experiencing at the moment. In 2024 was a year of, we've got this happening, or this happening. And then 2025, with the political landscape and all the other things that are happening, is completely unprecedented, and all of the different things challenging projects. So the so what is being able to understand how to deal in the different environments that come from. Have you had any experience with the how to facilitate this in a risk management space? How do you plan for unprecedented events to your risk management? And Perth Arena got hit by an unprecedented mining boom and an unprecedented GFC, and people aren't very forgiving when you have those. But when you're looking at a table like this, those are the two effects that are on. How do you plan for those events?
Well, we come back to Donald Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns, don't we? And the difficulty of trying to do projects in those environments. Those are where you would position most defence projects because of the complexities and the inability to control some of the major risks. And that is the nature of complex project management, which is actually a sub-discipline of project management, general project management. In order to, I guess, answer your question about risks and how do you try and deal with them in a general project, well, you have to be mindful of the environment that you're in. But there are things that you would not put on a risk register. At the time you were doing Perth Arena. One of them would have been a GFC.
Yeah.
Another one would be a pandemic, which didn't happen for Perth Arena, but it happens for ECU City, for example. So how do you deal with those? Well, you can't. You just have to accept that project management is about doing the best you can with the resources that you've got to achieve the scope that the stakeholders want. And it's as simple as that. I would argue that there are loads of successful projects, but we just don't hear about them. I mean, the very nature of an Auditor General report is that report goes to Parliament. It's Parliament that sponsors that. And they're full of doom and gloom because there's not much to report. Well, no, that's not true. A lot of Auditor General reports do actually include projects that have gone well. It's just that there's nothing newsworthy in it. So everyone wants to have a dig at the government, whether you're the opposition or whether you just don't like government. And you can have a dig at these projects, but you will never know, for example, what goes on in commercial sector. You may think a company is incredibly successful, and it may be financially successful, but it may have some massive failures of projects that never see the light of day. So we are always critical of government projects, but generally speaking, I think we do a good job, given that some of these projects don't need to be delivered urgently. I mean, the only real pressure on Perth Arena was to try and get the Hotman Cup, and when that deadline had been missed, let's do it. Which is why we mentioned about value, and you can end up talking about net value, and impact. And I think when you, as project managers, once you start thinking in terms of what impact is this project going to make, you can go to your executives, because they're the ones that are setting this project up to deliver that impact. And that needs to be a discussion. That, for me, that's a more relevant discussion for your steering group. And I think project managers at times need to move away from, we did talk about work breakdown structures, but some of the kind of minutiae, while they are really, really important, but you need to have that debate because you need executive buy-in. And they need to understand everything. And this is where we come back to the thing we mentioned right at the start. The business case is not a document that you just write to get the funding and then stick in the bottom drawer. Like a risk plan, that should be a living document that you keep coming to and you keep pointing out what you've already signed up for.
Absolutely. So in terms of, reflecting on, what we've talked about today, what impact do you think the change in governance that happened during Perth Arena, what impact do you think they had on the final delivery? Because it did turn around, didn't it?
Yeah.
And what was that?
Yeah, I think once the governance challenges were addressed, that really put the project on a steady footing. And I think that some of the things that had been forgotten about, overlooked, or not done for whatever reason, those things were picked up. And once you start putting a strategic framework with gates in it, so you can do reviews and you can have this accountability, it just makes your project run better. And that's the irony I always talk about governance. It's the project manager that usually sets up the governance, and then you're accountable to that governance. So, yeah, it's certainly got back on track as a project once those frameworks were in place and aligned with the best practice at the time.
Now, what I would love to do is now reverse this back into some of the key lessons learned of Perth Arena, and how, if there was one thing that you would want people to take away from this this podcast, what would you want them to take away as a lesson learned from Perth Arena?
And this probably applies to most government projects. Don't tell people how much it's going to cost or how long it's going to take unless you've done that planning work to understand how much it will cost and how long it will take, because otherwise people lose confidence. Some of that discussion might need to take place behind closed doors. Very difficult with government projects because you have elections and everyone wanting to announce, potential politicians wanting to announce things, initiatives, or what we can do. Doesn't help the project manager. So there almost needs to be some training for the politicians so that they don't disappoint people.
One of my big gripes is that we continue to have a 67% mega project failure rate. And, like across the world as a profession. how do we change that? And that's one of the questions, that I bring, the reason for me to drive into doing these discussions and putting on the show. And how do we help the next level of project managers take the learnings from previous projects and make sure that we're not repeating them? This is the one mechanism. Case studies and unis and those and mentoring are other mechanisms. Another mechanism is what we're starting to talk about is competence. So competence is a key word that I use, is that our profession is fast moving away from knowledge and experience. Would you agree? And we're starting to move into this competence requirement where you need the knowledge, the experience of the context, and to be able to demonstrate that you can competently go through these life cycle stages of a project. What is your thoughts on the value of competence versus just knowledge and experience?
Yeah, knowledge and experience only gets you so far, and you definitely need competence, and you need confidence to be able to do a project and appear to be confident and knowledgeable, even though you're actually not too sure because you've never done that one of this scale before. But you've always got a plan. And that's the thing in terms of knowledge, you can fall back on, well, have we got a plan? Do we know what it is we're trying to do? And once you take that approach, you can see that competence is really important because it makes knowledge and it makes experience come to life.
Absolutely. Talking about the organizations that can demonstrate competence, give us a bit of a rundown on some of the things you've seen in PMI that you're familiar with that demonstrate people have competence in the planning stage.
Yeah, I think one of my issues with PMI is that there's historically been quite a reliance on processes. And I think processes only get you so far. In some ways, they take away a little bit of thinking. Now, I've argued with other project managers who would probably violently disagree with me that it's the PMI approach in things like PMBOK are providing a framework. And they'll say, oh, no, it's just a guide. No, it's actually a framework. These days it's telling you principles, it's telling you how you should act. And it's also now, and I think the new version's coming out shortly. That'll be version 8. And that's reintroducing some processes. And I just find it weird that we're trying to reintroduce processes. And I do think there's a role for processes so you can understand what comes next in a logical chain. And if you're applying tailoring, you can jettison some of those. But you need competence in order to see the bigger picture, because this is not just about creating outputs.
Not anymore. Projects aren't about just outputs anymore.
No, most of the challenges on project management don't come from creating outputs, making things. They come from people, and they come from situations that happen because people change their mind. And there are no answers to it. When I worked on a paper about risk for the International Centre for Complex Project Management, and we couldn't come up with any solutions. It was just be aware of this and be aware of that. So competence is basically the mechanism you can use to try and get through all that.
Absolutely. And so in terms of, as process and knowledge comes into PMI and those elements, one of the things I see coming into Australia recently is the ITMA competence, international competence of project professionals. And while absolutely PMI has done a fantastic work in bringing people together and creating those process awareness and just a general, how would you say, like a understanding, so baseline understanding of what projects is. One of the reasons why I support ITMA is it takes it to another level. How do we level up project management? And this is one of those methods that could potentially do it. The competence testing is a conversation between two people, not knowledge and a resume. And while a knowledge and resume needs to happen within the competence discussion, the context and application and demonstrated application of that needs to be a part of the conversation. So when we talk about this in the planning stage, so if you want people that are capable and competent at a project, we need to start looking past just knowledge and experience and start looking at, okay, how do we get the best people in the environment? Because if you've got the right people, the right processes will follow them because they will be aware of them. When we're looking forward, you said you've got PMBOK version 8 coming out. We've got, tools that are coming available to us through AI and new versions of software coming out. What are you most looking forward to seeing project managers dive into in the planning phase that could help them?
I'm not always popular when I talk about this, but I have written a few papers about AI, and I think the impact on projects will be significant. And it's more a question of what AI can't do, because when I talk about AI, we're not talking about ChatGPT, we're talking about agents.
Yeah.
So we propose something called agentic project management. That's in a paper.
Yeah.
And this is about trying to use the power of AI agents to do a lot of the stuff that takes time. So theoretically, your plan can be generated instantly. Whatever plan you want can be generated instantly, assuming that the data that it's based on is accurate and is continually updated. But you also need guardrails around AI so it doesn't start going off and doing what it thinks is the right thing when it's not. And we don't understand how that will work in project management, because there are times when we don't really understand what project management is about and why. I mean, we know why it goes wrong, but we don't always understand how we can stop it going wrong. And we talked about unknown unknowns, and we talked about defense projects. Lots of money going into defense at the moment. You can see that AI might be the way to, might be put forward as one of the mechanisms to deal with this complexity. I would argue that's probably going to make it worse, because we still, the factors that cause the complexity will not be solved by AI. So some really challenging discussions over the next 5 years or so. And we've just got to see if we can shape that in order to keep the profession abreast of things and make sure that they have the confidence and competence to be able to deal with it.
Absolutely. And, it's a very important topic, especially for planning, because, when you think about what can AI do in delivery, not unless we have the robots, that's different. But planning, it definitely has a huge value to contribute. But then we're also going to probably, in my view, go back to what we were talking about before, which is competence. You need to understand what the AI just gave you or the agent just gave you and understand, is this giving me correct information? Am I just accepting what's being put into front of me on face value? Am I going to challenge this? Am I that time poor now because I've got because the next thing that comes from that is time poor project managers become even more time poor. They used to be able to trust the junior PMs coming through to go, okay, you know what you're talking about a little bit while you learn and come up the food chain. Now it's going to be potentially an AI giving it to them. So time poor project managers now need to dive full detail into these reports that are written by agents, and then make sure that they're not saying anything they shouldn't have. We're already seeing consequences in lawyers, doing this. They haven't verified that the case studies that they're putting forward are even real, and then the lawyers are getting a lot of trouble real quickly. Our profession is very likely to follow that same suit. If lawyers are doing it and they're time poor and constrained, it's going to happen in our profession as well. And what are we going to do about it? But yeah, so in terms of tools that are available to the PM in the short time, project management, AI agents are definitely going to be one to watch out for. So in terms of, we're coming to the end of, an awesome discussion. Have you, you do a bit of podcasting, don't you? Do you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I've done some podcasting with generally for professional organizations, presenting podcasts or being a speaker on podcasts. I also do quite a few events where I'm invited to talk about various aspects. I think I've got one possibly coming up in March. There's another one, I had two, I think, before the end of the year. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I just go with the flow. I'm pretty chilled about these things. I don't, some people are pretty passionate about it, and I am passionate about project management, but not to the extent that I'll lose sleep over some of the things because I'm not doing projects.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, well, I'm one of those silly suckers doing the losing sleep and setting up a podcast channel and all of those things. Well, it's been fantastic having you on the show. Do you want to give us, as we're going to launch this in November, what are you doing in November?
Well, November for academics is primarily conference season. So we present paper, we've written papers, we present papers, we present at conferences, various types of conferences. And it's also the period where we start writing papers before semester one starts in 2026. Mm. Of course, with being at ECU, we will be pushing our chairs down the Mitchell Freeway to move from Joondalup to the new city campus.
Big moves happening.
The big moves happening. I did say to some students, we're pushing chairs, and they thought I was being serious. Are you going to have yellow jackets on and flashing beacons? I said, yes. It was a lie. We just leave things and they magically appear.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And I'm actually doing a piece of research on impact of various projects. So I'm always happy to come and talk to organizations, whether that's at conferences or whether organizations want me to give them some guidance about business cases or strategic approaches. Always happy to do that sort of stuff because I like to maintain connections with industry. So yeah, pretty busy month, November, and then we only really here for half of December, and then we get a break. So, and then it's back to everything in January.
Not fantastic. So yeah, look, my November's pretty busy. First week, we've got International Project Managers Day. I'm helping run the International Project Managers essentially showdown. Project Showdown is what we're calling it. It's team people versus team process. Part of the discussion that we had today as well is going to be extended into that. But no, it's a great event. It's going to be a hybrid event, in person in Victoria and WA. And it's going to be a debate between two teams, which will be available on stream as well. So yeah, the link available to the event will be available below as well. Then moving into, you've got the PMI monthly event, so I'll be attending that. But I also will be continuing on our second Scope Creep Social event at Market Grounds. So we found a location to have it consistent and right next to ECU as well. So in terms of November 19th, we'll be at Market Grounds. It's a Scope Creep Social. So what that means is that we can get there, we can talk about anything. You can practice your networking. You can come in. We'll talk about projects. It's just there, as a general face-to-face network. We need to get back in front of people because that's what's happening in the out there in the professional world. And then in terms of the next stage, the next podcast that will come out in December, we're looking at delivery. Now, I still haven't locked down the next project or the next speaker, but I'm hoping it will be very relevant into South Perth, and that we can push that forward and then get that established just before everyone goes on break, and a bit of an overview. Richard, it's been a fantastic discussion from the get-go. We've been here, and not only that, I look forward to working with you across ECU, especially now. It's going to be a lot easier, being in the CBD and being able to tap on your door and have that conversation. I'm really looking forward to that. Any final comments that you have?
No, just a good luck for November. Everyone's busy. Your initiatives are really good for project managers, definitely. And wish you every success. If I can make any of the events, I'll turn up. But yeah, we'll carry on carrying on.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
So as we've discussed, please like, share, subscribe. If you want to see more people come in and better project case studies utilized, get people involved, be a part of the discussion even. So if you've got an idea that you want me to come and present or do element, get in touch. I'm really trying to see where this can go and take it out there and improve the project profession. Thank you for being with us today. This is Projects in Focus. This is Reece signing off. Thank you.